I am continuing on with the skeleton theme that I've been doing for the last few builds. And here's the next one up. This is the NSI, National Science Industries American Mastodon. I actually think this is a Palmer kit. Palmer, I think, I don't know what the relationship is, but between Glencoe, Ringo, NSI, I think they manufactured all of these kits. And this, uh, looking it up on ScaleMates, looks to be one of those. And this, I think, originally came out in 1959, or at least was initially produced in 1959. So, having built some of these kits, I have a little bit of trepidation because they're kind of gappy. I'm not going to lie to you. So, well, let's see what this one does. Could be fun. All right, let's go ahead and get into this here. There's not, I guess they're see and build the Brontosaurus. From the sides of the kit, there's not really anything particularly exciting. It's got a little blurb here about the Mastodon. Box doesn't have a whole bunch of cool stuff, unlike the Bandai boxes or the compelling art from the Prehistoric Scenes series. So, all right, that's our box. Now, I did get this off of eBay, and I've looked at it, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know that this is going to be much of an unboxing. Here's our instructions. It's got a little blurb on the Mastodon, and here are the instructions. I'm already a little worried about this. When you've got the tusk in two halves, that screams seam lines and puttying and sanding right there. Same with the legs here. So I do have some concerns. I did look at the base earlier. It came in three. Why they did this, I don't know. But it came in three parts. I'll show the base here. Oh, by the way, so I don't think the kit originally came with this or glue stick or, yeah. This is sometimes what happens when you get stuff off of eBay. You don't know what kind of adventure you're in for, but let me find this other piece of, I'll go ahead and pull the parts out while we're at it. Unfortunately, there it is. I found what I was looking for. I'll show this to you real quick. So, this was together, but it got broken. I probably broke it. This is the nameplate and the base, which honestly, this is not much of a base. It's pretty wimpy. So, 1950s model kit design and engineering, not always that great. So, yeah, and not exactly sure how I'm going to do the lettering on this. This is going to be a challenge. I'm looking at the rest of the parts here. I'm not going to put all these parts out because a bunch of them are loose. Some of them are still on the sprues. Oh, this is not... Looks like somebody tried to, looks like there was a partial build on this. Yeah, the seams don't match up here. This is going to be some sanding. I am already not happy about this. But this is what we've got. Okay, well, Just come off without me. I gotta see if I can, because I don't think that this is in right. Not happy about this. So sometimes you have fun adventures, and sometimes you just have adventures. Well, we'll see where this takes us. One other thing, before I get into parts cleaning, I wanted to show this here. So this is glued in, and I don't think it's supposed to go this way. I don't think it's right. So I want to remove this. It looks like it was cemented in. So occasionally I have to take parts apart. So I'm going to take this Tamiya ultra thin cement, and I'm going to go in and put it in all the cracks here. And the idea is that it will melt the plastic. And that's how cement works in the first place, is that you apply it ideally to the two pieces here, and then it melts the plastic, and then there it goes. And then when it sets, it creates a weld. So what we're doing is the same process, getting it to melt the plastic and then pulling it apart before it welds. So looks like we were successful there. All right, on to parts cleaning. In the injection molding process, a release agent is often used to allow the parts to be removed from the mold. The problem with this release agent is that it could interfere with your paint job, so you want to remove it. Now, in the case of this kit being produced in the late 1950s, it probably did use a release agent. I understand that more recent kits don't need that, or they don't use that, but they probably did on this. So I'm not going to take any chances. I'm going to go ahead and clean the parts. Now, usually what I do is I squirt it down with some Windex, wipe that down, squirt it down with some water, and wipe that down. I want to try a different process here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the parts in a container, and then pour in some Windex and maybe add a little water, and then shake it around, let it sit for a little bit, and then move all the parts to another container with just water to wash that down again, and then remove them and dry them. So I'm going to try that process and see if that works better than what I have been doing. Let's see what happens. Step one was the tusks, and these tusks were engineered to be in two pieces each, which means there's a long seam line going either side of the tusk, and they didn't line up right, and there was a lot of filing and sanding and some gaps and a lot of puttying. I initially used Tamiya Putty basic type and sanded that. Had to do that a few times because the tip on one of them broke off, and I had to fill that in and then sanded it some more, and there was a little gap that I ended up using the Vallejo plastic putty to fill that little tiny gap in. Not happy about that, but let's drive on. I chose to do steps 2 and 3 together because I was going to go a little out of order. The skull assembly doesn't exactly have enough structure to hold together without the front of the skull piece. So I had no choice but to kind of do it out of order. The skull itself still is very gappy, and the tusks don't exactly fit in well either. They ended up being a little bit uneven, and the skull is a little bit wonky. I had to do a lot of puttying and sanding, and yeah, it's just it offended my soul. Step 4 was the spinal cord and rib cage assembly, and it went together better than the skull did, but it was still extremely gappy. Now, for this assembly, I used the Vallejo plastic putty instead of the Tamiya putty because it was something that I could fill in the gaps. It wasn't a big gap, so I could fill it in pretty easily, and then with a wet paper towel smooth it down so it wouldn't need sanding later. Step 5 was the neck, and it only has 2 pieces, and it's probably the easiest of the assemblies thus far. There was a little gap that I had to do with the Tamiya plastic putty, but nothing that required too much puttying. Unfortunately, with the Tamiya putty being water soluble, I could run a damp paper towel over it and smooth it out enough that I didn't have to go back and sand it. I just want to point something out here. The flashing on this will give you an idea of how not good this is. All of this flashing here, I've never seen a kit with so much flashing. It is really not good. Step 6 were the forelegs, and most of it went together except for the upper leg bone was made in 2 pieces. Why? I don't know. This could have been 1 piece, but maybe they wanted to give people the experience of building a model. Anyway, so it's in 2 pieces. They didn't necessarily line up well, so there was a lot of puttying and sanding. And anyway, while we're at it, let's go over the process that I used. First, I applied rather generously some Tamiya basic putty and let that dry at least 12 hours. 24 would probably be better. Once that was dry, I took a round file mostly and sanded it or filed it down. I also had a flat file that I used on certain parts. Once that was done, I used the Alpha Abrasives professional hobby sanding files. Now, I don't know what makes it professional as opposed to amateur, but okay, professional. And that was the 180/100 grit. And went over the same edges. Then I used some Alpha Abrasives. Get it here. Alpha Abrasives sanding film. And I started with a coarse grit and work successively towards a finer grit. And for the last three, I did a wet sanding, so I squirted it down with water and then wet sanded it to get it as smooth as possible. So there was a lot of flashing on these leg parts that had to be scraped off. So again, this kit could have been much better engineered. Step 7 was to do the rear legs, and it was very much like the forelegs. The foot and the shin went together just fine, and the upper bone again was engineered to be in two pieces. Again, annoying. Could have been one piece. I don't know why they didn't do that, but they didn't. It did require some puttying, but fortunately the seams were thin enough that I could just use the Tamiya plastic putty and go over it with a damp paper towel to smooth it out. So it didn't need as much work as the front limbs did. So at least I got that going on for me. Step 8 was the pelvis and tail section. And the rib cage assembly, the point where the pelvis goes into or connects to the spine, was uneven and really difficult to line up. So I ended up, and I don't do this often, but I ended up using some super glue and some accelerator to get that into place, because I didn't trust the connection I was making with the cement. There is a part to the pelvis that has two holes that it connects to, and I had to take a file and drill those out some and file down one of the pins to get it to fit. So again, 1950s model kit engineering at its finest. Step 9 was attaching the head, neck, and sternum to the spinal cord. Now, I had attached the head to the neck because it kind of needed it for the assembly of the head. I had put it together before, but it didn't stay together, and it really needed that neck piece for support. The neck going into the spine was a little bit dicey because the parts for the spinal cord didn't line up well, so I had to carve some pieces down and butcher and mangle it to finally get together, and even then I needed to use some super glue. The sternum went together just fine, nothing particularly exciting about that, but yeah, again, and I've said it multiple times, and I'll probably say multiple times again, 1950s model kit engineering, not so great. Step 11 is attaching the legs to the rib cage. So I think it's a scapula that the earlier leg assembly goes into, and that connects to the rib cage, and I used some clips to hold that in while the glue dried. I'm not so certain about how the legs are lining up, and I'm thinking I may have to come back and revisit the legs and how they stand. We'll see. I'm going to stop here for a second and talk about this, because this is really getting frustrating. So it's in progress, but at various points, legs and parts have fallen off, and it doesn't stand right, and it's I'm not happy about it. What I think I'm gonna do, because it's got these little pins here that go into the base, that maybe I need to align it so that the legs fit into the base, because the base is actually the last thing you're supposed to build. But I think I'm going to do the base and then come back to the rest of the kit. Not happy. All right. So this is now assembled, and it's all kinds of janky. I'm not going to lie. It took an obscene amount of Zap-A-Gap and Accelerator to get it put together. There were parts falling off of it left and right. The tail came off. The legs didn't stay together. I think when they engineered this, they didn't account for that you need good plastic to plastic contact and enough surface area to make that weld that the cement does, to make it stay together. But all right, now it's done. So my next step is going to be to prime it and then get into painting it. And I'm hoping that that will go better than the assembly did. Let's see. This base is a little bit different. Now, I have dealt with some bases that had the nameplate built in, but this one, instead of having a nameplate, just has raised lettering through the textured surface. So I'm going to have to approach this a little bit differently. What I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to go over it, the letters, with the Vallejo model color brass, do a few coats of that, and then spray it down with some Tamiya clear gloss, and then paint the base along with the rest of the model. And once that base is completely painted, then I'll take a Q-tip with isopropyl alcohol and go over the letters to reveal them. I used Tamiya gray surface primer instead of the white Tamiya surface primer, because the model itself was already molded in a white, or at least an off-white plastic. And when I went to paint this, I wanted to make sure I could identify areas where I had missed in painting, and so the gray was more likely to show up. Now, for the first base coat, I'm using Tamiya model color stone gray. I'm starting off with that, and I'm doing a very, very thin wash coat, kind of a wash coat, just a very thin coat, because with a skeleton model, there are all sorts of little cracks and crevices that you might miss. So having a much thinner paint, even though it's not providing as thick a coverage, is at least able to seep into all those little cracks. I will go back using another, again, light coat with probably a slightly different color, to build up layers of color, but also to fill in any places that might have gotten missed on the first base coat wash that I did. Moving on to the second base coat, again doing a very thin coat. I mixed up Vallejo model color light mud, which is not that far away from the Vallejo stone gray, very similar. If you get them up close, the light mud is actually a little more on the gray side. I mixed that up with a little bit of the Vallejo model color pale sand and Vallejo model color flat earth. So between those two, should have gotten good coverage. Shouldn't be any primer peeking out. So I'm going to let this dry, and I think I'm going to move on to some washes to get into the cracks and crevices to do the dark tones. So I think that's where I'm going next. The next thing I did was to take some Vallejo camouflage black brown and go over with a very, very, very wet wash, go over the whole model. And the idea being that the capillary action would get all the dark paint into the recesses and give it kind of a mottled look, and to make the highlights pop out when in contrast to the black brown. So I from time to time would paint it and then squirt it down with water. You could also take a paper towel and wipe it down, but I kind of like squirting it down with water because that continues that capillary action so it gets into the recesses. So to do the highlights, I used Vallejo model color ivory and Vallejo model color flat earth. I mixed those together and then dry brushed over all the highlights. And when I did that, I tried to go perpendicular to any ridges or edges to help make those stand out. Earlier I talked about doing the lettering on the base here, and I had gone over it with some gold and then clear spray paint and then painted the base. Now that the base is painted, I have taken some Q-tips with isopropyl alcohol and lightly brushed over the lettering to reveal the brass letters. The last step was to cement the model to the base, and I've got to be honest, I usually don't like doing that. I usually prefer to have it where you can pick the model up independent of the base. But in this case, to get it to stand right, I had to use some Zap-A-Gap to glue it down and then hit it with some Insta-Set Accelerator so that it would dry or set quickly. So finally, it's all put together. The Palmer American Mastodon is done, and not without its share of problems. As I've mentioned a few times, this kit was developed or engineered, produced, whatever, 1959, and it shows. This is a time when plastic model kits were still in their infancy. The fit is not good. The pins that go into the legs don't go in right, and there's not enough surface plastic to plastic contact for the cement to do its thing. So it's got a lot of problems. I know that they kind of marketed these to kids, but I think a kid would have a hard time building this kit. They would be very frustrated. I certainly was very frustrated. I had to use an ugly amount of super glue to get this to work. not happy about it. And the base, for some reason, was in 3 pieces. Doesn't make sense to me. But it's done. Any of these Palmer kits, if you're looking for a good skeleton kit, Palmer probably isn't the brand for you. I've been really impressed with the Bandai imaginary skeleton kits, the Tyrannosaurus, the Mosasaur, and the Triceratops. Those really good. Recommend those. These Palmer kits will probably test your patience. But it's done, and at this point, I'm going to move on to the next kit, which I will continue on with the skeleton theme. I don't know exactly which one I'm going to do yet, but I'm looking at them, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 4 more skeleton kits. A couple of them are the Bandai Limex, and I've got some Lifelike Hobbies, or actually, I take that back. I've got one more Palmer that's going to be the Neanderthal, and it comes with the figure and the skeleton. So we'll see what those adventures are like. And then I've got one that's like a big Tyrannosaurus. So a few more to do, and then I'll be moving on to something else. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and more adventures to come.